Ah, the 90s. That decade holds plenty of fond memories for me as a gamer, what with the Super Nintendo being released in 1991 and all. Basically, as soon as I was old enough to hold a controller, and to understand how to use it, I had plenty of classics at my disposal. That's just an expression, of course. Like I'd ever dispose of classic SNES games. There was Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, just to name a few. But then, there were others. As kids, my brothers and I often got SNES games as gifts. Some were from our parents, others from other kids' parents, because let's face it, the kids didn't buy us squat. The thing about these games, though, is that many of them were quite obscure. I had not ever heard of these games before, nor did my brothers or anyone we knew. And even these days, I still hear very few people talk about these games, or even know that they exist. Thing is, many of these games I actually enjoyed playing. So allow me to share with you my picks for the top 10 SNES games you probably never played.
Number 10.
I still have no clue who the hell this Bill Laimbeer guy is, but apparently in the year 2030, so like in about 15 years, he becomes commissioner of a basketball league, gets rid of all the referees, and creates a playstyle where there are absolutely no rules. Fouls don't exist, and you could basically throw a bomb at another player, and that's perfectly legal. Combat Basketball was made by Hudson Soft, and it was the very first basketball game released for the SNES. Quite frankly, it actually kinda sucks, but I still found it pretty entertaining back in the day, if only because it was so silly. Or maybe it was that one kick-ass song.
Number 9.
First of all, Westikins? From Westica? Really? I'm guessing that place is somewhere to the west? Anyway, Skulljagger? Skulljagger? Skulljagger. We'll go with Skulljagger. Skulljagger, Revolt of the Westikins, is an interesting little gem. I don't remember too much about it, other than the fact that bubblegum is a pretty big gameplay mechanic. You heard that right. You can chew different types of bubblegum to do things like hover and jump higher. There's even a practice mode where you basically just practice your bubblegum skills. Other than that, I never knew what the story was, and I don't think I ever passed the first level. But the bubblegum thing made this game memorable enough for me to throw on this list, so whatever.
Number 8.
Originally an arcade game with a much longer title, Super Off-Road is a different kind of racing game than any other I've played. Rather than using Mode 7 like Super Mario Kart and F-Zero did, Super Off-Road uses a single top-view camera angle. This meant that down was actually utilized in this one. Crazy, I know. One feature that this racing game has that others I played at the time didn't is customization. You can customize your truck with the money you earn through winning races and such, and I'm a sucker for customization. Aside from that, it's a fun game in general. Maybe not as fun as Super Mario Kart or F-Zero, but fun enough to place on a top 10 list.
Number 7.
Otherwise known as the other Street Fighter, this game had plenty of similarities with the wildly popular fighting series, right down to having some Japanese dudes spouting Japanese move names that I never bothered translating. It may have been popular enough to merit a sequel and several ports since its initial arcade release, but the series' existence seemed to have been long since forgotten. One thing this game has though that Street Fighter could never quite compete with is the ability to fight as Rasputin. Okay, so maybe that's not anything to write home about, but still. Anyway, World Heroes is pretty fun, and it was my very first fighting game ever, long before I ever picked up a Street Fighter game, so it was definitely memorable for me.
Number 6.
A game that just needed to be made. I mean, who didn't open up their fridge and think, what if all this food just came to life and escaped and I had to go on a journey around the world to get it all back, with some evil chef trying to thwart me? What? No one else did? Just me. Well, whatever. That's basically the plot of Out to Lunch anyway. I mean, sure, there are much better platformers on the SNES. This is Nintendo's console after all. But this game is something a bit out of the ordinary, and so it left quite the impression in my memory banks. If my parents had never gotten me this game, I'm not sure I'd ever have known what it is, or believed anyone who told me something like this existed.
Number 5.
Some kids grew up with lemmings. I, on the other hand, had toddlers. They are similar games in that your main objective is to get some little people from point A to point B, but the ways in which you do so is totally different. I have some pretty fond memories of this one, partially because I remember bonding with my uncle as we played multiplayer together, and partially because of the catchy music. Toddlers is more like Lemmings with a dash of Solomon's Key, because you, a sorcerer's apprentice, or apprentices if playing multiplayer, creates and erases blocks in order to guide the little guys to their destination. There's also some kind of story, but naturally I never cared about that as a kid. The game was fun, and that's all I cared about.
Number 4.
This Enix published game is certainly one of a kind. Seriously, I have never played any other game quite like this one. I've played city building sims such as SimCity, and I've played side-scrolling action games, but both genres in the same game? That's what this game is. In Actraiser, the protagonist is basically God, with the antagonist being Satan, the Master and Tandra in the versions outside of Japan. You don't actually control Master God though, but instead control his little angel servant for the simulation sequences, and an animated sword-wielding statue for the more action-y parts. The game is actually fairly good, but unfortunately wasn't all that popular, having since all but faded away.
Number 3.
Every time I hear people speak of a new Earth Defense Force game, I can't help but think of this personal classic. But then I remember that no one else knows about this one and are instead talking about a third-person action game where you fight giant things. In fact, for a while I was wondering if the games were somehow related. They aren't, by the way. The Earth Defense Force I'm talking about is a side-scrolling shooter, much like games in the R-Type series. Fun fact, this was actually the first side-scrolling shooter I ever played. It's also one of my favorite SNES games ever, although that could just be the nostalgia talking. Or maybe it's the game's amazingly amazing soundtrack.
Number 2.
Even though it has one of the most incredible soundtracks I've ever heard in the 16-bit era, not many people are aware of this game's existence. Well, not many people I know at least. Perhaps it's the most popular game ever in some areas of the world, but I have yet to meet someone who has ever played it aside from my brothers. Regardless of its popularity though, I definitely fell in love with Plok. The game, not the weird-looking protagonist. It's really fun, with its Rayman-like feature of throwing limbs at enemies and the different power-ups that help to spice up the gameplay. And did I mention the soundtrack? So good.
Number 1.
You guys know who Silicone and Synapse are, right? Wait, let me reword that. You guys know who Blizzard Entertainment is, right? Before they were known by that name, they went by Silicone and Synapse. And back in those days, they developed one of my favorite puzzle games ever. In fact, I may even go so far as to say that this is one of my favorite SNES games ever. The Lost Vikings is a fun little puzzle platformer involving some Vikings being abducted by aliens, then escaping into different periods of time as they try to get back home. So, you know, usual Viking shenanigans. You play as Eric the Swift, Beliog the Fierce, and Olaf the Stout, each with different abilities that you utilize in order to reach the end of each level. This game is probably the most well-known out of all other entries on this list, with the Vikings even making cameos in World of Warcraft, as well as recently being announced as playable characters in Blizzard's Heroes of the Storm. But it's still an underrated game I rarely ever hear about. Hell, there was even a sequel I didn't know about until I hit my teens. For the record, turns out the sequel is also pretty amazing. Do you agree with our list? What SNES games did you enjoy that next to no one else has ever played? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. Do you have an idea for a list you'd like to see us use? Leave that in the comments as well, and we might just pick it up. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us, of course.
Be sure to click on me too.
Yeah, what he said.